Hey guys, Jameson DIY here with something a little bit different today. We're going to be talking about the timing chain rattle from Nissan and Infiniti 3.5, 3.7 liters. Now I made this video uh, that you see on the screen a few years ago, and this is a very uncommon rattle, but I thought it was uncommon enough that someone might get some use out of it. But like I said, this is a very uncommon rattle for this power valve here that you see. Uh, in comparison to a timing chain rattle. And since I made this video, tons and tons of people are having a timing chain rattle and they think that maybe it's this power valve when it's most likely the timing chain and not this power valve. Anyway, a viewer sent me a video clip of his timing chain noise, and I just thought I'd share that with you in case you're experiencing the same noise, so you can kind of hear what it sounds like. So that's the timing chain rattle. So the timing chain rattle, typically when it first starts on the Nissan engines, it will happen mostly when the engine's cold. As it warms up, it'll start to go away, and then once it's fully warmed up, you may not hear it at all. Once it gets worse, you'll start hearing it all the time. So that's kind of an indication that it's your timing chain or something in the timing area. So let's look at here um, what we're talking about. Here's the timing chain, the main timing chain. This actually has three timing chains. The main one, which is the one that's probably making the noise, and then you have these two smaller ones here for the cams. So in this whole setup here, normally what happens is either the tensioner will go bad or a guide like this guide right here, and then there's also an upper guide which is here. Yeah, this guide. So this guide right here puts tension on the upper part of the chain. This this guide right here is for the actual tensioner. This piece is the tensioner. So typically one of three or all of these things have failed and the timing chain's loose and flopping around inside the cover. The other possibility is that these actuators right here for the variable valve timing have stuck, and it's causing some sort of position in the chain that doesn't allow it to be fully tensioned or something along those lines. Either way, this is a pretty involved repair. If we look here at the labor time, just to do the camshaft chain, it's saying 12.2 hours. Now that's a labor time for an experienced mechanic or technician, not for the average person. For the experienced tech, they might be able to do this job in 9, 10 hours, 7, 8, depending on how many steps they can cut out of the process. A DIY mechanic, it might take them a few days. A non-experienced person altogether, I wouldn't even bother messing with it. At that point, you would just want to find a shop that you trust or one that gets good reviews and have them do it. Let's talk about cost a little bit. If you're paying a shop to do this, you can take this labor time right here and multiply it by about 100. So you're looking at about 1,200 bucks in labor. Then there's several $100s worth of parts, depending on what's bad. It could be another $1,000 in parts plus oil, coolant, sealants, shop supplies, things like that. You're easily looking at 2,500 bucks on average. On the low end, it might be under 2 grand, but you can expect probably 2 grand at least to have to pay someone to do this repair. Okay, so if we look at the procedure a little bit here, first we just got a rundown of all the parts and things that are involved. Um, you can kind of pause the video and read through this if you want to, but I can give you um, a Cliff's Notes version. Is essentially everything that's bolted to the front of the engine has to come off. The front of the engine being where the belts are at. So all the belts, the pulleys, all that has to come off. Um, the alternator bolts to the side of it, the AC compressor bolts to the side of it. That stuff has to be moved out of the way. Um, the lower oil pan has to be dropped because there's two timing cover bolts that go on the bottom of the timing cover. So the lower oil pan has to be removed. So of course all the oil has to be drained. The pan will have to be resealed afterwards. Um, you've got to loosen the engine from a motor mount or remove a motor mount and drop the engine down in order to gain access to things that you need to access. Because and that's on the front wheel drive. If you're working on say an Infiniti that's rear wheel drive or a 350 or 370Z that's rear wheel drive, it's significantly easier because you have a lot more space, so you don't have to actually lower the engine or anything. All you need to do on those to gain access is to remove the radiator fan. You'll still have to remove all the stuff from the front of the engine, but you won't have to lower the engine because there'll be plenty of access. So moving on, it's going to tell you to remove on the front wheel drive ones the wiper assembly, a lot of stuff that it takes a lot of time to remove on rear wheel drive and front wheel drive Nissan and Infinitis. It will tell you to remove the valve covers, which requires you to remove the intake manifold in order to find compression stroke, top dead center, number one piston. I can tell you from experience that's not necessary, but it is the proper procedure to find top dead center on number one. Um, but most people that have done this job multiple times know that you don't need to do that. Uh, I'm not going to go into all that. You can Google that if you want. But it's going to tell you to remove these front VVT covers. There's where it's telling you to remove the valve covers. It tells you to remove the spark plugs. Like, I mean, it's really a lot of stuff that you don't have to do, but I'm just letting you know this is a lot of work regardless of which direction you take. And if it's something that you're not experienced with, then I wouldn't touch it. Here's where it tells you to get TDC of number one. It's pretty straightforward here, and this is why it tells you to remove the valve covers, because you can look here. It wants you to look at the position of the cam lobes on the number one cylinder. Um, so that's the by the book method defined number one TDC. That's not the only way. It's the by the book way. So just letting you know that's why it tells you to remove the valve covers. Um, let's scroll down a little bit here. It's going to tell you that you need to hold the engine in order to break the bolt here on the crankshaft pulley, which if you have a small impact, a stubby half-inch drive impact, that will break it loose typically also. So there's different ways to break that bolt loose, but if you don't have a bunch of tools and you're not experienced, this is another stopping point. Something to think about if you're trying to do this at home. This part right here could just stop you in your tracks. So anyway, a lot of things to think about. It tells you to use a special puller to remove the pulley, which I've never had to use. They typically will just kind of wiggle off, unless you're in a rusty place. I don't have rust here, so maybe that's why I can do that. So let's scroll down. Here's where it tells you about the lower oil pan, blah blah blah, and here's the two bolts I was talking about. Once you remove the lower oil pan, you'll have these two bolts. Should be a 12 millimeter head, um, and then here's all the bolts for the timing cover. There's a lot of bolts, and it wants you to remove them in a sequence, and then of course tighten them in a sequence and torque them properly, which you should definitely do that because you don't want to have to do this twice. So there's a few little pry points here where you can start the prying process. This thing is glued on with RTV, so it can take a while to get it all back together. Um, it's a very big case cover, and so there's a lot of glue, and you just have to work it and spend a few minutes. And you don't want to pry really hard on one side when another side is still glued down, because you can warp the cover, and you definitely don't want to do that. So it's just a slow process. Um, so here we're talking about the crank seal here, um, all the stuff that you have to clean off, which is quite a bit. This is all RTV. All this stuff needs to be cleaned off. The crankshaft seal right here, if you're gone this far, you should replace that. It's really cheap. Um, Here's a close-up of the timing chain. So like I said, here's that tensioner, which could have failed in your case. Here's the guide for this tensioner. Here is a guide here, which isn't on every engine. This will be on some. I did a 3.7 liter, I think. I don't know. I did one the other day, and this guide was not here. But it did have this top guide. It did have everything else was the same, but this guide was not here. So what's failed on yours? If you're lucky, this tensioner has failed, or this guide up here is broken. These are plastic. They are reinforced with metal, but a lot of it's plastic. Um, so in the perfect world, one of these pieces have failed on yours. The chains usually don't fail. They do stretch. Well, it appears to be stretched, but it's technically not stretched. The links will wear, and it causes the effective length of the chain to be longer. It's not actually stretching. Either way, um, if you have a good tensioner and guides that are good, that chain stretch will be taken up by these things. So typically the chain itself hasn't failed, it's one of the pieces around it. So the more expensive failures would be these VVT actuators right here, the cam sprockets. They had a problem with those for a lot of years. So even on low mileage engines, these things were failing. They might have worked that out. I don't know, because I don't work at a dealer, so I don't know what kind of problems these are associated with. But all the ones I've done in the last few years, these sprockets were fine. It's just a failure here at one of these points. So moving on, it's talking here about the tensioner. I mean, there's guides on the internet to do this, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time looking at this. I'm just going over this. This is a lot of labor intensive stuff. So if you're not comfortable, don't do it. The whole point of the video really was just for the sound, because this old video that I have, I wasn't able to capture the noise on camera, and so a lot of people just see this rattle here and they think, oh, you know, mine's rattling too. Is it this power valve here? Well, this isn't that common. It maybe on a few years it was common, but the timing chain rattle is much more common. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll down here, and if you're interested, you can read kind of the rest of the instructions here. Alright, that's the end of the removal instructions. There's a whole separate section on installation. It's if it's something that you actually need the help with, I can probably make another video, but I think the purpose mainly of this video is just to show you the sound. That's my purpose anyway. It's not an instructional video by any means, but you know, if you feel like you might be getting lied to or ripped off from a mechanic shop, and you know you're not sure that the noise your car's making is the timing chain noise, then you know, you heard it here in the video. I've explained when it does it, and it gradually gets worse, of course, when it'll do it all the time, not just when the engine's cold. But it's very common on any timing chain car with a wear in the timing components for them to start only making the noise when the engine's cold, and then uh, gradually quieten down once the engine's warmed up. So if you can catch it early before there's any major damage, that's the best way. When it first starts making the noise, just go ahead and get it addressed, so that more damage doesn't occur, which more damage means more money. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching. Hope this helps.